Okay, so let's talk about a non-monopoly on violence. First of all, we need to lay some ground rules. Just because there's a non-monopoly on violence, i.e. the state is not the only one with the capability nor recognized authority, whether legal or otherwise, of enacting violence upon any group, that does not mean a quote-unquote anarchic society in the traditional sense. That doesn't mean going out and, murking your neighbor just because his fence is painted an off-white color and you don't like that. Okay, no. There is a certain level of moral responsibility. So start, conflict should be handled with diplomacy if possible. Now, diplomacy is not the end-all be-all, but it is the better alternative, mathematically speaking. However, should diplomacy fail, you need a second option, excuse me. And that might just simply include self-defense or defense of a third party. But, sometimes more drastic action is needed to stop a threat. I am wary of calling it preemptive, but you could think of it that way. However, you would still be subject to the laws, regarding that sort of thing. Now, this is where in our nation, a trial by jury of your peers, or, let's be realistic, it's not exactly peers of your same community. It could be peers from across your local region, like your county or whatever. But I think with the advent of social media and how fast news can spread, the community has, they've called the internet the online small town, or something of that effect. So, news can travel quickly where people can be informed about things before the jury selection has even started, right? So let's take the case in point of the subject of one of my recent videos, the Marcus Renfro incident. So there's a couple options here. Either the community can decide that, he acted out of line, and despite his best intentions, he was out of line to a point where we can't support him. In which case, they look at the facts of the case, and I don't know all the facts of the case. To be fair, I wasn't there. I'm only going on what I have learned so far. But they look at the facts of the case when it goes to trial, and they decide him guilty of aggravated assault with a deadly weapon, which I believe is what he's still charged with. So that's option A. The community, despite his best intentions or any other intentions, decides they're not with it. Option B, they decide to implement jury nullification, where they say, yeah, he did it, but we do not care. That kind of a thing, right? Where, yeah, he did break the law, but jury's not gonna say that he's gonna get in trouble for it. Fuck it. The bad and the good that transpired washes each other out, right? And of course, there's option C, where they just find him innocent. Whether or not by the evidence he would have been, they decide collectively that they're not gonna find him guilty. They choose not to convict. Now, what's going to be the outcome of that trial? I don't know. But I think all of that kind of exemplifies the social powers of the people, where they can decide, yeah, we know what the law says, we do not care. In a way, they're taking, if not by the jury, by legal, what's the word I'm looking for? By text of the law, they're not taking the monopoly of violence away from the government. They're effectively taking it away, saying, yeah, no, he's good. You don't get to use your threats of violence to end his life, either literally or metaphorically with prison, just because he did what he did. So, Then, of course, as I said before, you have self-defense and defense of a third party, which should always be enshrined for the people. Never should the people be completely reliant upon a state for their own protection. Now, there are certain things where the state is going to be more useful. Sorry, you're not necessarily going to have the best time resolving contract disputes with a fucking AK. I mean, you could, but probably isn't going to be the best use of resources. In which case, a regular civil law would actually be better. Again, there's definitely limits to a non-monopoly on violence, but still, it's better than a complete monopoly of violence by the state, because we have seen throughout the 20th century and before, and even in the current day, where the people as a whole are not in a good state of affairs when the government has a complete monopoly on it. So, and then the final power of the people is just general collective action. And that's touched on a little bit before with the jury nullification thing. But when the people fully decide, or at least a large enough majority of them to make a difference, that they're fed up with whatever is going on with the state, or whatever the state's trying to do, they're no longer going to be governable. You know what I'm trying to say. Sorry, my pronunciation is garbage. So, but now to get to that point, this is where peaceful protest actually comes really in handy. Because the fact of the matter is, most people do not want to commit to a violent way of doing things. And that's completely understandable and respectable. We should try to seek a nonviolent approach if possible. We reserve the right, but if we can't avoid it, mathematically it's a better option. But to even get to that last resort, again, like I said, most people aren't going to commit to that. They just do not have the desire, do not have the drive, and that's fine. But you increase your chances of getting those people with a nonviolent form of protest because you can start networking, which allows you to spread your message, allows you to hone your message to where people can get behind a united front. So that way, you're no longer just random people upset about random things. You're a collective upset about very specific grievances. And that united front is what you need to take on something like a state. And that's how you can challenge the monopoly on violence of the state. They can't afford to lose as many people as they think they can. They start losing people that take over, that are in really important positions. They start losing people connected to their own enforcers, because guess what? People got to sleep somewhere, and so do their families. And that's a very dark thought, but I mean, civil unrest and destruction basically is just that. It's not a fun topic, and it's not exactly something to be fantasized about like some people do. And I assure you, I am not trying to do that either. I'm just running through the options here. But again, we should strive for not doing that, but again, reserving the right if necessary. You're free to disagree with me if you'd like, and if you have any constructive criticism or addendums you think I missed, then by all means, please leave them in the comments. I am interested to hear your thoughts. Thanks.